Hey everyone, this is Katherine Kowalczyk with another episode of the Responsibility Quotient podcast. Thank you for joining in tonight. Today is June the 6th, 2024. And today I have a great guest on today. His name is Donald Lee. I met Donald Lee through COVID during my various speaking events that I was doing across the province for a little while on behalf of Lawyers for Truth and for a little bit with the Alberta Prosperity Project. And I'd like to tell you about Donald. Donald is eclectic. He's a musician, teacher, band director, economist, power engineer, marketer, businessman, athlete, public speaker, and author. And we're going to talk about his new book tonight. He holds degrees in economics and education. He is an Albertan and spends most of his time and life in Fort Saskatchewan. Donald spent 2 decades in the fertilizer industry in many roles as laborer, chemical process operator, marketer, and new product developer with the research group. He made a midlife career change and returned to his first love, music, then spent 2 decades as a teacher and band director in various schools in Alberta, Kuwait, and Pakistan. Donald has written many books, including The Band Director's Lessons About Life and The Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth. When the COVID fraud turned life upside down, as it did for most of us, Donald looked deeply into what was really going on. The result was his groundbreaking and insightful book called What the Hell is Going On? The Web of Fraud That is Enslaving Everyone and How We Can Escape to Freedom. He followed that up with a companion volume that deals more with solutions to present the problems, both personal and global. It's called The Way Forward, How to Escape the Totalitarian Control of the New World Order and Heal from its trauma. And I'd like to welcome Donald Lee here with me today. Hi, Donald.
Hello, Katherine. It's a joy to be here with you and with our audience. Hello to everyone.
Yes, thank you for coming. Before we get started here, I just want to add to the stage here a link to your website, and we'll do that again at the end of our podcast. But this is where you can find Donald and his books. It's called cominghomespirit.com, and we'll refer back to it later on. But thanks, Donald, for coming. Like I said, I met you a few years ago when I was speaking in and around Alberta with Lawyers for Truth and also with Alberta Prosperity Project. So what brought you to the point where you thought you needed to write these books, in particular, What the Hell is Going On, and your new book, The Way Forward?
Right. Well, I mean, in all my presentations that I do, I always explain that first because that's obviously first and foremost on people's minds. So when I retired from teaching in 2019 to become, a spiritual author and speaker, and my first book, The Band Director's Lessons About Life, is a little book of modern day parables inspired by little events that happened when I was teaching. At some point, I started writing these down, and we sometimes call them teachable moments. When you think this is the bigger lesson happening right here, the lesson I was trying to teach you. And so I started writing some of those little stories down and then turning them into parables and drawing a spiritual lesson out of each of them. And I published that book in December 2019. And of course, just after that, then the craziness happened. And in January and February of 2020, I went around Alberta a little bit and had some book launch events and book signings in bookstores and that sort of thing to try to sell some of my books, because I'm not famous. So I can't just put a little message out there in the Twitterverse and have millions of non-followers, buying my book. So I've got to go around and actually talk to people about my books. So I started doing that. And in March of 2020, I was just in the middle of planning a cross-Canada book selling tour when the whole world shut down. And I
Oh,
was left
wow.
with 1,000 copies of my book in the basement and the $10,000 Visa bill I couldn't pay. And I thought, this is the flu. What the hell's going on? Little did,
Donald, I said to my husband at the very beginning, they've just rebranded the flu.
yeah,
And that was in August of 2020. Yeah, so I agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, they kind of rebranded everything because like, everything was COVID, right? The flu was COVID, a cold was COVID, pneumonia was COVID. Like
Well,
if you had,
and no symptoms was COVID too.
yeah, yeah, and if you didn't have any symptoms, then you were asymptomatic COVID.
Yeah.
And now, you know what? Who is it? Was it Deborah Birx? I think with the CDC in the United States. Yeah, there's just a headline just today or yesterday saying that, oh yeah, people have to be worried about asymptomatic bird flu.
I saw that. I saw
Like
that and I thought, holy shit, what the hell's going on? And so, I mean, you couldn't have chosen a better title for a book. I remember probably 10 years ago now, when I was going through my second divorce and I came into a whole bunch of knowledge, the disclosure knowledge, right? UFOs, ancient history that we weren't taught, all of these different things. And I created a website that I don't have anymore, but I wish I did. And it was called Say No to Bullshit. And it just would have been perfect for what's going on right now. But anyway, so you're in COVID, you have this book that you've written, and then COVID hits, and then what happens?
well, then of course we couldn't do anything. Right? We couldn't. Everything was closed. Businesses were closed. That's how my hair got long, right? Because for most of my adult life, I've had this short, clean-cut businessman look, and then I couldn't get my hair cut in March, and I was mad about that for a couple of weeks. And after a while, I came to the realization: hold it, well, why am I being mad? Like, why don't I be happy and just let my hair grow? So, I'll go back to my old hippie self, teenage hippie self, because it's time for another rebellion anyway. So I kind of
Yeah.
made a little bit of a commitment. It's not firm. I might break it sometime, but I said, okay, I won't cut my hair till we get freedom back. So yeah, you're looking at
Oh
4 years.
no.
Yeah.
You're gonna look like Gandalf soon, which
Yeah.
is a
Well, I
good
do
look.
call it some. Yeah, because sometimes I call it my Gandalf phase.
Yeah. Well, it's really nice to have you on. I mean, I've met so many people throughout my various of speaking opportunities in Alberta. And, one of the things that COVID did for a lot of us was we identified a new family, a new tribe, if you call it, a new group of people. And the friendships and the connections that I've made over the past 4 years have been absolutely amazing. I mean, it's been sad because I've lost friends, so that's been difficult. But at the end of the day, people come in and out of our lives for different reasons and different seasons. And you're certainly somebody that it's been a pleasure to know along the way. So you've given me an outline of your book, of the most recent book that you've written. And it's called The Way Forward. And you describe it as being more of a solutions oriented. Thank you very much. As a solutions oriented um, summary of what we can do, and also a little bit about what the hell is going on. And I read this outline that you've provided, and some of the things that you say I really have resonated with, and I'd like to delve into a little bit further. Yet the other day I had Marco van Hugenbos on the podcast, and I was expressing to him that it's important that we identify the enemy if we are going to try to get out of this mess that I think many people find ourselves in, although there's certainly a lot of people who seemingly are oblivious to what's going on, or maybe just don't care. I don't know what it is, but part of what I identified as the enemy was this idea of Marxism or globalism, which is rooted in Marxism. And in fact, you you have identified the real enemy is not the people, but the ideas and ideologies. Do you want to
Yeah.
expand upon that?
Sure. And in fact, in both of my recent books, both What the Hell's Going On and The Way Forward, I do explain what I call the policy hierarchy. And I think that's the closest we can get to understanding who and what the enemy is. Because like there's stuff sort of behind the curtain, as it were, and that we can't see. We can speculate about some. Some people say, "Oh, it's the Illuminati, it's the what," all kinds of things, right? And maybe,
Yeah.
probably some of that, all of that. Who knows? I made a conscious decision when I was working on What the Hell's Going On that I would only include in that book things that I could find adequate physical evidence for. So it's really a book about evidence, and there's almost 50 pages of end notes. I didn't want all that because it's not an academic book. It's a book for everyone. But my first editor, I had a developmental editor, and his most common comment was, "Cite this." Cite this. I had to go back to. I made a bibliography as I was working on it, but that's too massive for the to put in the book. That was, really just for my um, for my own use as I was writing, and so old people are
Mm.
easily distracted. Anyway, I got distracted there. So I called it the policy hierarchy, and the idea comes from a British investigative journalist by the name of Ian Davis, and so yeah, we see that what we can see about our adversary, and that's why I use the word adversary, because we don't know exactly who it is, but we can see something about who the adversary is, and we can understand something about how the adversary is operating, and it's enough to understand then how we can best respond. And that's what The Way Forward is all about. How do we sensibly respond to these three types of warfare? So in the
Okay,
policy
well
hierarchy,
let's back up a little bit. Let's try to identify what we do think who the enemy might be. I
okay,
mean, and
so
maybe let's see if we can get a consensus between you and I on that.
okay, so what we can see, normally we think of governments in terms of the structure of governments, and that's how we're taught, right? We say, okay, we have the House of Commons, and we have the Senate, and then we have the Prime Minister, and the Cabinet, and the Privy Council, and we understand the structure and the relationships between different sort of bodies within the structure of government. But what we can't really see is the structure of what's really going on. It's clear to those of us in the freedom movement that things are not actually operating the way they're designed to operate. So how are they really operating? And we can see, if we look carefully, how things are functioning. And that's the idea behind the policy hierarchy. How is policy really being made? Because we were taught in school to understand that, well, we elect people, if we're talking on a national level in Canada, for example, we elect members of parliament, and they go to Ottawa and they have debates and they put forward bills in the House of Commons to make government policy. And so it's our own representatives, our own members of parliament in parliament who make government policy. But we can see that it's actually not working that way anymore. Policies are actually being set at some level above the level of governments. So who's above the level of governments? Well, what we can see is the group that I call the policy makers. And there may well be other levels above this that we can't see. Most likely there is. So at the highest level, the policy makers, we have groups like the Bank for International Settlements, the central banks, the secret and semi-secret societies like the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group, and all those things that many of us have almost become household names in the freedom movement.
Well,
And
certainly in the freedom movement and the UN. Let's not forget the UN, World Economic Forum, and World
well,
Health
yeah,
Organization, and
but
those
they're
subsidiaries.
really, the UN is really the next level down. because policies are not really made in the UN. Policies are made at this higher level, and they're passed down to then the policy distributors, like the UN, right? If people who have, you may have read or heard accounts of people who have actually gone to some of these big UN conferences, like the COP conferences and the whatever,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and people who are kind of aware, or astute to what's really happening there, have come out realizing, hold it, we had these little meetings and we had these policy discussions, but in the end, what we said didn't make any difference. The policy was already set before we went to that conference. The big conference is just window dressing, right? And
Right. So
rewards
you
fraud.
have these like Bilderberg and Council of Foreign Relations, and then would you say above that would you include the secret societies?
Well, those are secret and
Uh,
semi-secret societies.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, because the Bilderberg Group, I mean, it was secret at one time for many years, right? People said there's no such thing, and then finally it came out that, well, actually, there is such a thing, and it's been
Well,
operating since
I'm talking more like
46, 47.
I'm talking more like the Freemasons, Skull and Bones, and then there's probably other ones that we don't know
Yeah,
about as
and
well.
those are, if we know their names and if we know something about them, then they're really semi-secret. They're not really
Yeah.
secret because we know about them, right? But there may well be other societies that we don't know about. I mean, John, what's his last name? In his book, The Council of 300, he said that there's the Council of 300 is above all of these groups. Maybe it
Mhm.
is. Maybe it is. So, but when we see how the warfare against us is actually functioning, then we can understand. Well, for example, if you want to take an analogy, um, not everybody knows that much about the history of the Second World War, but for example, during and particularly after the Second World War, there was a big debate really in the West about, well, should the Emperor of Japan, should we hang him, right? Is he responsible for this war in the Pacific? Or is it the generals? And I mean, ostensibly the emperor had all the power, but then people who've looked into how things were actually functioning, the emperor didn't have that much power, and it was the military, the army generals, who had really kind of taken power away from the emperor, and he pretty much had to go along with it, with and so where power actually resides is often not where it seems to be on paper, or how people
Well, and you know what?
say.
And
So,
so
in a,
I think I can
but
agree with you
for the
then.
people who are fighting that war, that didn't really matter, right? Is it really the emperor that's the bad guy? Is it the generals that's the bad? Like, who's really the bad guy? For the people who are fighting the war, it doesn't matter, because what weapons, strategies, tactics are being used against you,
Mhm.
and what strategies, tactics, and weapons you need to use to defeat those that are used against you. And that's the state that we're at. We can see the strategies, tactics, and weapons that are being used against us. And so we can formulate sensible strategies, tactics, and weapons that we can use. And that's what the way forward is about. Does that make
Okay,
sense?
so well, yeah, it does to me. I would agree with you that it's the people that we see being presented as our leaders are just placeholders, and they are beholden
NPCs.
to NPCs, except more dangerous, I think. And they of course, I would agree with you, are taking their marching orders from definitely not the democratic consensus of whatever country or province they're leading. And so I refer to them collectively as the globalists,
Yeah.
and because to me they're right now the most impactful. We have the World Health Organization that slyly distracted us by not uh, not passing the treaty, but did pass the International Health Regulation Amendments, and which ostensibly gives the World Health Organization a lot of power over our healthcare sovereignty, which is something that I've been discussing for years now. And a lot of people would agree with me. But of course, by and large, the mainstream class of people aren't tuned in at all. So, but it's obvious to me that we are going to lose our sovereignty. And in fact, we know that by and large we already have, and that they're going to try it again with this new avian bird flu, whatever it is that they're going to unleash upon the world. Notwithstanding that nobody's ever decided or has any interest in figuring out really what was behind COVID, even though, as we started off, it resembled the flu. And in fact, in 2021, there were no flu cases reported in Canada, which I find quite peculiar. Anyway, so what is going on? What the hell is going on? Do you want to summarize that? And then we'll from what the hell's going on, and then we'll talk about the way forward, because I think, we've set this framework of that you and I at least can agree on who the enemy is. I don't know if everybody else will agree with us on this, but regardless, we agree on that. So let's go forward with what the hell's going on.
Sure. And you know what? Can I just finish off a little bit about the UN? Because the United Nations is perhaps the key, but not the only organization that's in the policy distributors. They distribute these policies. And we can also see that the UN has been turned into the New World Government. But it's not, of course, it's not representative, right? It's a dictatorial government, and we can't see who the real dictator is at the top. They don't want us to see that. So all of the different agencies of the United Nations have a role to play in controlling different aspects, what we might call different vectors of control over humanity. So the World Health Organization, which is an agency of the UN, is taking control over everybody's bodies and health, right? And minds, because mind control plays into this as well. We see that sustainable development is being used to take control of all of the land in the world. In fact, it's part of their goals, not just all the land, but every material thing in the world, because sustainable development intends to catalog and digitalize every material thing on the planet and make it all part of the Internet of Things. That's part of sustainable development's role in this whole massive control system. And we see that the IPCC, right, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, they're in charge of taking control of the science and taking control of energy. That's what, like, I've known for decades that this climate alarmism doesn't make any sense. It's not scientifically sound. It's scientific nonsense. But I couldn't figure out why it persists until I started researching what the hell's going on. And then I realized it's about power and control. They want to control all the energy in the world. So they want to get rid of all the other forms of energy except electricity, because electricity, then, you can't generate that in your own home, at least not with the technology that's available right now.
Or without getting killed. Let's face it. People have developed different sources of energy and have mysteriously suicided themselves.
Yeah, and that's why those people who are working on it now, and I have heard of some, they're being very secretive about it. So there seem to be ways that we can generate electricity economically in our homes or in our businesses or on a small community scale. But anyway, they can generate electricity, and then they can then they're creating a shortage of electricity, right? Everybody has to do everything electric. But like, if everybody went to electric cars, we would need to at least double our whole electricity production and distribution networks. Nobody's planning to do that. There's no plans to do that. Why would that be? Well, if you understand that the idea is to create scarcity, because you can't control something that's abundant. You can only control something that's scarce, and that's part of totalitarianism. The government controls things so that you depend on the government. You depend on the government for healthcare. You depend on the government for energy. You depend on the government for money, for your salary or your universal basic income. That's why they're pushing people into you. That's why this is coming. Not because it's good, not because it's a good economic policy, not because it's a good social policy, but because it leads to control. It's all about control. And the central bank digital currencies. Why do we need that? We don't need it. It's about control, because they can control absolutely everything you do. And so all of these so that's the Bank for International Settlements and the World Bank, and these are creations of or associated with the United Nations, right? So all of these the United Nations is being turned into the administrative side of a one world totalitarian government. It's not the legislative side. You don't need a legislative side because it's a dictatorship. Anyway, so that's about that's about the UN. So these are the things that I explain in the book, What the Hell's Going On? The subtitle is The Web of Fraud That is Enslaving Everyone and How We Can Escape to Freedom. So all of these different vectors, they're all frauds, right? This climate alarmism is a fraud. This COVID thing is a fraud. The currency, I have a chapter on the financial and currency fraud. What's going on is fraud. Like monetary, as an economist, when I did my economics degree in the 1980s, we had just lived through and come through this period of high inflation in the 1970s. And I was very interested in that. So monetary policy was, my number one area of interest when I did my economics degree. And starting about the late 1990s, mid to late 90s, monetary policy just stopped making sense. And it has never made sense since then. And what they've done in the since 2020 is just absolutely ridiculous. Actually, what they've done since 2008 is absolutely ridiculous. But it's crazy. So, that I believe that, and what I explained in that chapter on the financial and currency fraud, that's to destroy our money. Like, how could you can't convince people or justify replacing a perfectly good currency. But a failed currency, well, you have to replace it with something else. So they're intentionally destroying the world's currencies so they can justify bringing in the central bank digital currencies. And that will force people into central bank digital currencies, because old money will simply have to, we just stopped using because it's no good anymore. And we see now, just the other day, the Bank of Canada lowered interest rates, not because inflation, and then the European Central Bank will likely do the same thing, and they're expecting that announcement today or tomorrow, and then the US Federal Reserve will do the same. All the Western countries lowering interest rates, but inflation can come back into their target range, right, of 1% to 2%, and even to 2% is it's an arbitrary thing. So inflation.
Well, I don't even think that. Well, of course it is, because they may have lowered the interest rates, but we're still paying crazy amounts at the grocery store. We're paying crazy amounts for housing. We're paying crazy amounts for gasoline and at the pumps. And so really none of this, it doesn't, I think they're tinkering with the numbers, and, just like they computer modeled COVID and everything around that, and how they're going to computer model this avian flu next thing that they're going to roll out. Basically, I've stopped trusting all government authorities. Like anything that the government says, I automatically start at the point of, this is absolute bullshit. That's my starting point.
This is a lie. You start at the point of, this is a lie.
And probably think, okay, well, what's the opposite? Yeah. Exactly. So we
Anyway,
have, and so how do we get out of this? Like, I want to know what the way forward is. And I'm sorry I haven't read your book yet. There's been some stuff going on with my life, with my personal life and my kids and stuff that has distracted me from all of this material that I always have great intentions of getting through and then never get through. So tell me about how we can get through this.
okay. So we're being assaulted on every level of our being, right? Our body, mind, and soul. So they're attacking us with psychological warfare, with spiritual warfare, and on the physical level of our body, it's what's called fifth generation warfare. And we can maybe get into explaining that if you want. But
Yes, I
so
would love that.
we need
Please.
to. Oh, okay, okay. Let's take it can't be done in a sentence or two. So the whole idea of fifth generation warfare kind of proceeds like this. The idea was developed by American military strategists starting in about the 1980s, and they divide modern warfare into what are these five generations. So the first generation of modern warfare is characterized by single projectile weapons, muskets, cannons, and so weapons and tactics always go together, right? When you change weapons, it forces a change in tactics. So we're talking about in these different generations, we're talking about different weapons, different tactics. So the tactics associated with first gen warfare are what are called line and column infantry tactics, right? And we've seen this, the red coats, marching, and then they stop and fire, and then they take another march a few more and stop and fire, etc. And then you typically have a fairly orderly battlefield. One general will survey from horseback, ideally from a hill somewhere, and he'll look over the whole battlefield and he'll issue orders and commands as necessary. Send in some reinforcements there, send the cavalry over here, bring the artillery up on the flank, do all these things. So that was characterized as modern warfare to the American Civil War. Right after that, then we came up with automatic firing weapons. First the Gatling gun, and by the time of the First World War, we had machine guns. We also had artillery had also developed that was absolutely massive. So World War I was a different war, and of course surprised everybody, and the generals didn't know how to handle it. Right, it quickly evolved into something that they weren't prepared for, as people are finding out with the war going on in Ukraine and in Gaza and things like that. That the new weapons like drones are the new things now. They changed warfare quite dramatically. Now we have to work out different tactics. So second generation warfare is characterized by multiple weapons and massive, overwhelmingly massive artillery. The battlefield then becomes much larger, partly because the range of the artillery is much greater. And so it became impossible for generals, for any one person to oversee the whole battle. And the battles became increasingly quick. But generals didn't know how to handle this, and they tried to use the same line and column infantry, which resulted in the absolutely astronomical death counts in World War I battles, right? You mean running millions of men across open fields through barbed wire into machine gun fire, all the while facing artillery shells the size of automobiles. It led to hundreds of people dead in a single battle, and nothing gained. Then progressed again, and World War II is now characterized by what we call third generation warfare, also called maneuver warfare, because everything became mechanized. Even infantry became mechanized and traveled on trains and trucks rather than having to march everywhere. Made battles much quicker. Everything happened so much faster in the maneuver warfare, third generation warfare. You had ground attack aircraft. You had tanks now that replaced cavalry. And so that was third generation warfare. Fourth generation warfare is insurgency of all types. So think of the Vietnam War, where the lines now become blurred between combatants and civilians, right? Americans would never knew who was the enemy and who was the friend. Village children might be um, placing landmines on the jungle trails, and all of these Vietnamese people looked the same to them, and they weren't wearing uniforms, right? They couldn't tell who was on their side, who was on the other side. Somebody might, wave at them, smile at them, and then, a few hours later, shoot them in the back or place a bomb somewhere where they're all this is insurgency warfare of all types. It's very difficult to defeat insurgency warfare with any of the three, generation 1, 2, or 3 warfare. Then now, so everything becomes far more chaotic and in insurgency warfare. Now, 5th generation warfare, it takes chaotic to an extreme. You don't even know, people won't even know they're under attack. People won't even know there's a war going on. And that's what we have today. We're in the midst of a war, and most people don't even know it. And we can't tell who's on our side, who's not on our side. Your neighbor might turn you in for having, more than 6 people in your home, or for not wearing a mask, or like God knows, right? And 5th generation warfare is non-kinetic. That is, doesn't use guns or bombs or tanks or airplanes. Uses all kinds of other stuff.
It uses a vaccine.
That's one. That's one
not
weapon.
Funny. It's actually not funny. It's horrific, but I mean,
yeah.
What else? How else do you react, right? That's what they do.
Yeah. Let me just take an aside there to follow up on that thought. That what I explain in the COVID chapters on in What the Hell's Going On is that the Americans came up with an evil twist on the standard strategy of biological weapons. So normally in biological warfare, the idea is that you develop some pathogen, either a bacteria or viruses weren't used much because they were difficult to work with until this CRISPR gene editing technology came along. And then research on viruses kind of took off. But the idea is that you develop a pathogen and a means of delivering it, usually artillery shells, because you can aim them very, very accurately, to deliver that pathogen onto the battlefield. But you need to protect your own soldiers somehow, or they'll succumb to the same biological weapon. So with viruses, there's no real antidote. Our antiviral vaccines are really not all that effective. So when people are working on viruses as a biological weapon, the idea is they always work on vaccines, so you can vaccinate your own troops ahead of time and then unleash this virus biological weapon on the battlefield, and your troops won't be infected by it. So that's the idea with the vaccine, and your vaccine to protect your troops from the virus. But the Americans, when they started working with coronaviruses, they turned this around. And with COVID, we saw that the virus itself, whether it exists or not, the virus was not the real weapon. The virus was the feint to draw people into the trap. And the real weapon was the vaccine. Because even with the virus or whatever, deadly virus, not everybody gets sick, right? Some people, for one reason or another, aren't affected by it. But if you can inject something into people, then you can get the weapon into everyone. And that's why they started to probably remember Bill Gates saying, in his kind of, sheepish kind of way, this doesn't really end until the whole world is vaccinated. Smile, smile. So the vaccine is the real weapon. And that's why it doesn't matter for that campaign whether viruses exist, whether SARS-CoV-2 exists, doesn't matter, because you got people to believe it. You use the psychological warfare. In fact, I have a little section that's called, something like, biological weapon attack with massive psychological warfare air cover. That was what it did. It wouldn't have worked without the massive psychological warfare to create fear in everyone and get them to, to agree to getting this shot in the arm. So that was essential. But then, I don't know. Anyway, so there's two phases to fifth generation warfare. The first phase is the information influence operation, and that is to prepare the ground. And most of our listeners probably know that in third generation warfare, like World War II, right, you would always have a big artillery barrage, aerial bombardment and stuff to soften up the target before you send in the infantry, right? You prepare the ground as much as you can. But with fifth generation warfare, the ground isn't physical terrain. The ground is inside our minds. And so
Mm-hmm.
preparing the ground is the information influence operations. This is part of the mind control operation. So in COVID, for example, the information influence operation was all the fear mongering for a whole year. Oh, COVID's going to get you. It's everywhere. You can't avoid it. Everybody's going to get sick and millions are going to die. But the only solution is a vaccine. But we've got one coming. We've got one coming. Just wait. We've got it coming. Stay in lockdown until the vaccine's ready, and then you'll be safe, right? So you build up this fear. People, it's all in our minds, right? You build up this
So
fear.
Donald,
So when you
why do you
unleash
think?
the weapon, people are asking for it.
Right. Oh, of course. Yeah. So why do you think some people fell for the bullshit government narrative and some people didn't?
There are many reasons. In the way forward, in the chapter on psychological warfare, I go over three. I explain three of them. And one is the idea of mass formation. And you've probably heard of this. Many of our
Yeah,
readers have.
Matthias Desmet,
Yeah,
he was really uh influential, during the height of COVID in
yes.
presenting that theory to the world, and it made lots of sense to me.
Yeah, me too. When I first heard him, actually shortly before I was in the first draft. I think I was working on about the fourth draft of the book at that point. And I thought, oh, that explains so much. And so I included some of that in the way forward, but in what the hell's going on. But also in the way forward, I include a couple of, because it's not the only way to understand what's going on psychologically with people and how people are essentially simply not able to perceive certain aspects of reality. And one of them actually is a fascinating new idea, just recently published. The book was published in December of last year by Nels. What's his first name? Dr. Nels, Nehls, German. He's a medical doctor. He's also a neuroscientist, right? He does research on the human brain. So his focus is not on the mind, right? Matthias Desmet is a psychologist. He's working with the mind, but Dr. Nels is looking at the brain, right? The organ of our body. And so his book is titled The Indoctrinated Brain. Have you heard about it, Katherine?
I have, but I haven't read it.
It's a wonderful book. It's a little bit more tedious, of course, than my writing because he's kind of an academic kind of a guy, and I'm not. But I summarize the main points in the chapter on psychological warfare. So he says the other things that were going on during COVID actually affected our brains, not just our minds, but our brains, the organ in our body, and it reduces our ability to process new information. And anyway, I probably can't really summarize it very well right now on the spur of the moment, but so I include that in the way forward. So there's many reasons. So one is mass formation. We also take a little bit of a general look at psychological warfare and how that affects people's minds. So in fifth generation warfare, the first part of it is actually the psychological warfare, the information influence operations to change people's perception of reality so that they
Mm-hmm.
actually, like, this is the idea of mind war. And I explain this, what mind war is. It's a broader and deeper concept than traditional psychological warfare. And what the idea in mind war is that you actually get the enemy to change his perception of reality so that you make up your own mind exactly the way your enemy wants you to make up your mind. And so that's what's going on. And there are thousands, I believe, certainly hundreds, but probably thousands of independent psychological operations going on at any time, overlapping in time and space, and targeted to various sub demographic populations
Yeah.
and stuff.
And these things, right?
Yeah.
They've helped immensely,
Oh yes.
push that forward, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I talk about that in the way forward too, that the main avenue for psychological manipulation and mind war is through screens.
Yeah.
And so, to protect ourselves, we need to, severely limit our exposure to screens and deal with real people. And the other benefit of that is that our adversary controls the digital space. Right? What
Yeah.
would all the stuff we're doing, including what we're doing right now at this moment, this evening on StreamYard, that could be shut down. That can
Yeah.
all be censored and controlled and whatnot, by our enemy. But we can control the real relationships with real people in person. And that's how we
Yeah.
need to work this. We need to work it, one person to another person, personal relationships, working together in real life, not through screens.
So as part of it, I know that I'm uh working with a group of people, many groups of people, but to do that, to build community, right? To make
Yep.
sure that we have uh, a different method of communication that's not this normal
Right.
digital communication, building community so we have different sources for food, and that we have the ability to access different needs, things that we might need. And so
Right.
that's part of it. And then so I take it as part of the way forward. I think you're advocating as well to help build or to start building a parallel society.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
Because everything.
what does that look like to you? Because, I think I don't disagree with you. I just think practically speaking, when if you understand the history of Marxism and communism and how that is rolled out, which is really what is being rolled out has its roots in those ideologies, and it's
Yeah.
worse than that because because it's not left or right anymore. I think it's good and evil, and I think ultimately at the end it's a war between God and Satan. But if you take it from the political ideologies and certainly economic ideology that has we can learn from history, by they're ruthless. They have no humanity, the people that believe this, and there's no compassion. And in fact, the people, they they do want to obliterate us, not to mention the fact that we have funding these entire programs. Bill Gates is a eugenicist, and really the goal for people like him at his level and above is the depopulation of our world. And so we have this problem, so that they want us gone. They want us to suffer and to make as much money off of us throughout our suffering as they can, in order to create the most amount of control and power and destruction and devastation along the way. How do you think this parallel society is going to work? And is it
Well,
actually possible?
I think it is, yes, and I think it's the only way forward, because everything, as we just kind of explained, everything, all the institutions and structures that we have in our society now are controlled and are increasing their level of control, and absolutely want to use that control to create scarcity of everything, so that we become dependent upon the government, so we do exactly what they say, and they'll end up, like you say, killing most of us and enslaving the rest. And the only way out of that control system is to build completely new structures to provide ourselves with everything we need, the basic necessities of life: water, food, energy, shelter, everything, right? Communication and opportunities for employment and whatnot. We need to build new structures so that when these other structures collapse, we have the nucleus of new communities, of a new, I call it the new
Mhm.
paradigm of community, how we're going to work together. Because we've had these democratic structures for centuries in the English speaking world, and we find that now they've been corrupted and turned into totalitarian control structures. So we need to go back to the drawing board and think, okay, how do we want to set up a community? How do we want to organize our relationships with other people, and in a way that ensures freedom for everybody? And this, again, affects and comes from every part of us: body, mind, and soul. So there's a spiritual dimension to this as well. How do we relate to other people? Which, leads again into, what I say in both books. And my little mantra is, in this spiritual war, our strategy is love, our tactic is forgiveness, our weapon is nonviolent non-cooperation. So we just need to stop cooperating with the existing structures and authorities, create our new means of our new communities where, like you say, they are trying to starve everyone, produce food scarcity all over the world. And
Yeah.
like, this is clear to most people who are probably listening to this podcast. So we need to
Well,
decentralize everything.
I agree. And, part of the message that I try to deliver when I was speaking and still do now is the idea of not complying, right? Simply don't comply, because when you don't comply, you do take their power away. And but for this to be extremely effective or even a little bit effective, you need the numbers from my perspective, and we just haven't had that. And this new round of tyranny that's on our doorstep, called the avian bird flu or whatever it is, that will certainly it'll be interesting to see how that evolves and how people react to it. I think by and large, most people are going to be convinced that, I don't know for sure, obviously, but it seems to me like it would make sense for them to make whatever it is that they're going to unleash onto us more lethal, in order to create the effect that they want, which is to get us to take the avian bird jab,
Yeah.
which apparently they've already created based on computer modeling, I understand, which is, that should raise red flags right away. But you have said that the solution is not to replace the people, but to remove the power. And to remove the power, you do that by, it's very simple, you don't comply.
Yeah.
However, it's not very simple, because we recognize that a lot of people, we're so intertwined and we're so reliant, obviously, we need, for instance, our bank account in order to get paid from our employer. And most employers aren't going to go along with not remitting their legally due income tax that they have to pay on behalf of their employee. Like the chain of command is structured to the extent that it's going to be very challenging to live outside of the system, because we don't have the mass quantities to not comply.
That's right. Well, that's why it's a process, not an event, right? So we
Right.
need to gradually look at ways that we can, and this is part of the important role that our groups, our freedom groups, play. We need to have, thousands of small groups. And one of the principles of fourth generation warfare, which is what we are doing, we're conducting a fourth generation insurgency war, again, in response to the fifth generation war that's being conducted against us. And so we need to think that way. We need to think in terms of warfare. Okay, this is an insurgency war, and one of the principles is that you need to make yourself untargetable, because we cannot be impregnable. So we don't want one big freedom group in Canada or Alberta or anywhere. We want thousands of small groups all over the place. We become untargetable. And in our small little groups, then we need to work on all of these things. Okay. And there's lots of groups. And as I'm going around speaking to groups, I'm, running into them. Groups all over are working on these things. How do we develop food security for our community? How do we develop another medium of exchange for our community? How are some of the ways that we can begin to extract ourselves from the existing systems and create our own systems and structures in our community? And every community can solve these problems differently. We don't need a one solution fits all. That's exactly what this totalitarian control system is trying to do. Like the World Health Organization is going to decide, what's healthy for everybody in the world, right? You can't decide on your own. That's exactly what totalitarianism is all about. It's one, one size fits all everywhere in our lives and everywhere in the world. And we don't need that.
And I like that idea, and it actually reduces my stress knowing, looking at it from that perspective. Okay, sounds good. But from my perspective, we don't have to be all things to all people, and that's what's important, I think, in this this fight that we're a part of. It's about it truly is about diversifying and relying on many different people for whatever it is that they're able to contribute to our society, or this new parallel society. And I think that is a little bit easier to digest, knowing that we can have different cells of resistance, without feeling the need that we all have to congregate en masse and show up in Edmonton.
Yeah, because we make ourselves a target.
Yeah. So do you see part of the solution at all, like a political solution, or do you see, within, I mean, I think what I'm hearing you saying as well is that, and what I've said about our courts, for instance, like people are wondering, why aren't we getting any traction within the courts and seeing, any good decisions upholding our rights and freedoms, et cetera. And we're kind of like, and I kind of say, like, we're fighting the system with the system. So it doesn't make any sense. We're fighting the system with the system. So what the hell do you expect? Maybe that should be your new book. What the hell do you expect?
Yeah, that's right. So we kind of didn't really finish completely explaining fifth generation warfare. So it uses a whole variety of weapons. There's political warfare, economic warfare, financial warfare, biological warfare, chemical warfare, like all of these different things. So lawfare is an aspect of fifth generation warfare. Our enemies are using it. Our adversary is using it all the time against us, right? The Quds 4, this is lawfare. And it also ties into psychological warfare, because part of the purpose is to create fear in everybody else. So, I don't want to be thrown in jail for years and years and charged with conspiracy to commit murder over nothing, right? So everybody else is fearful. So it ties into the psychological warfare, creation of fear, and of course it's whatever. So we can use lawfare against lawfare, but like you say, understand that we're working in their system. And it's like dealing with a psychopath, because these people that we're dealing with really are psychopaths. And the only way to deal with a psychopath is to leave. As long as you're interacting with them, you're playing their game and they win. And so our solution and our ultimate victory will not come through political action. It won't come through legal action. It will come through building a new society, new communities are parallel structures. But there's still value in, I mean, we're being attacked on all levels. We need to mount some defense against every attack. So yeah, bring legal cases forward, take what political action we can, and but understand that the our objectives there are necessarily limited. And so I think we've had an unrealistic expectation of what objectives can be accomplished with certain weapons that we're using. So if we undertake a certain legal challenge or a legal case, we think, oh, this will change everything. No, it won't change everything. Okay, it's not possible that that limited assault can win the whole war, but it can achieve some tactical victory, and that's worth pursuing. Well, at least, you know, in our groups, we have to be constantly evaluating what our tactical objectives are is and what our own operational capabilities are. So we need to think in terms of warfare because it is war. And then we won't be wasting our efforts and wasting our resources. Interestingly, just before this interview, I just got off the phone with a fellow in Ontario, and I'm going to be coming to some of their rallies that they put on. He said, well, we don't have speakers, you know, we just have these little rallies and protests outside. And you know, that's all we can do. That's, you know, takes up all our time. We're busy doing that. And I said, well, maybe you should think about having, you know, indoor events and stuff, because, you know, I think after 4 years, people should have figured out the rallies don't accomplish much. It's not
That's
that they
true.
accomplish. It's not that they accomplish nothing. They do accomplish some things. They keep the issues somewhat in public view, and they let people in the communities know, hey, we haven't gone away. We're still here. And that has value, and it is continuing to attract a few people. You know, some people come over and say, hey, like, what are you guys doing? You know, I've seen you here week after week and I don't really understand. And you know, so people who are open sometimes are kind of drawn into understanding better and drawn into the movement that way, but it's not going to achieve any political objectives. So you know, in our freedom groups, we need to think, okay, we're spending a lot of time on that, and there's very limited outcomes. Would our time be better spent doing something else? And
Yeah.
part of what
And
I'm
I think,
trying to tell groups is, yeah, start building, you know, start building our parallel structures.
yeah, I think so too. And I mean, it's clear from to me. I mean, although I do have a passion for politics for some strange reason, but I do. And but at the same time, I've seen that it's way more corrupted than probably I ever thought or any of us thought. And it's right now quite impenetrable because we have these different layers, and the bureaucracy runs things, and the lobbyists and the corporate interests are really influencing our governments. And so, I tend to agree with you that the way forward is, to remove ourselves as much as we can from these psychopaths, because
Yeah.
and these power hungry narcissists. I'm a family law lawyer, right? And everybody who comes into my office for a consultation that gets divorced, I'm not kidding, I'm not exaggerating. Everybody says that they're married to a narcissist, and it's and I go, yeah, yeah, you and everybody else. But it's true. And I've noticed this. I used to hear it every once in a while, like 10 years ago or whatever, or longer than that too, but I hear it all the time now. And it's to me, it's an indication of, and a good representation of where we are as a society. And I mean, I could go on and on about that whole thing and how families have been affected, but we have created this self-centered society that is, we see this so much in the rainbow community, right? And because they're so focused on their self and so self-centered. And of course, if you're Christian, uh, Christians tend, believe in, service to others rather than service to self. And so service to self is a very, is aligned with a satanic kind of worldview. And so, I can see all these parallels being weaved throughout our society. And so recognizing kind of where we're at, and then knowing what we can do, and that solution being to remove ourselves as much as possible. And in fact, that's what the Bible says as well. The Bible does instruct us to turn away from these people. And so we do have instruction, and we do have places to look for help and assistance. And I think your explanation about the enemy, who that is from a political perspective, like who in the world we can point to, what groups and organizations, and the ones that we don't know and the ones that we do know, and then trickling down to how that is impacting us from a spiritual, psychological, physical way is really fascinating. And I'm really looking forward to reading your book, and I hope that people pick it up. And I'm going to put up your page again so that people can see where to find it. And also, you have also another special offer for people that you had wanted me to share with the group. And I'm going to pull it up here. It's the blog sign up.
Yeah,
Is that
so
it?
yeah. So it's a little free offer if you're interested. I'm giving away. I write a blog. It's not all that frequent anymore. It used to be weekly. Now I'm trying to get one out monthly. I did get one out near the beginning of May, and I'm trying to get another one out here in the next week or so. So yeah, I won't overwhelm your inbox, but if you're interested in subscribing, then you get a little free gift. My first book, as I mentioned, is called The Band Director's Lessons About Life. And what this free gift is the band director's mini lessons about life in ebook format. So it's 5 of the 50 parables from the larger book, and I'm sure that our listeners will enjoy the little parables. It's a bit like a Chicken Soup for the Soul book. Each little parable is about 3 pages long, and each one starts out with a story that happened in school, although I've changed things, a little bit. And then each one has a reflection section that draws a spiritual lesson out of the events of the story. So there's a parable about love, and a parable about forgiveness, and a parable about perseverance, etc. So I think you'll enjoy the little the free ebook if you're interested in that.
Sure. A personal question. One of our viewers is asking if you're a Christian, and you don't have to answer that if
Yes.
you don't want to, but
Yeah, I'm fine, but I also understand, and I have many people ask me that question. But often it's there's a judgment in there, right? And
yeah,
we have over 1 billion Christians in the world, and many of them very concerned: are you the right kind of Christian?
that's right.
This is another one of the psychological operations, is dividing us into groups that are opposed to each other. Oh, so I warn in the way forward. I said, be careful about this. Avoid what I call the curse of theological certainty, because we can't allow our religious beliefs to be used against us to divide us into groups. This is another psychological operation, and we need to understand that whatever your religious beliefs, we're all children of the same Father.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are. However, it is good to recognize who people are, and boundaries are, they are a good self-defense mechanism.
Yeah, and that's why in both my recent books, I really bring out the importance of free will, right? That God grants us all free will. This is a divine characteristic, right? And so if we then go against that and try to override other people's free will, then we're going against God, right? Everyone is on their own individual journey back to God. And we need to, part of the freedom that the flip side of that coin, right? On one side is freedom. On the other side is allowance, because we need to allow other people the same freedom that we want. We want the freedom, okay, to worship the way we want and to pursue, to follow our own spiritual journey in life. Well, we need to allow everyone else that same freedom to follow their spiritual journey in life, and not tell them, well, you got to be on the same journey I'm on, or you're just wrong. This is another way to divide us into warring factions and groups.
Well, we certainly are going to, when we do get out from the backside of all of this, we're going to have a lot to dissect and learn from, and there'll be a recognition of what worked and what didn't work. And I hope we're able to really learn from this experience that we've gone through the past 4 years. But if history does tell us anything, it's more likely to be lost again, because that's what's occurring now. But I don't want to be a pessimist. I want to be an optimist. To the extent I can, but I think I'm mostly a realist. I think we're about to hit some very hard times, and I think that we need to, not sugarcoat it. And I think that what I'm hoping to achieve, partly by doing these podcasts, is so that people can identify who are the people that they can trust, that who's been telling the truth the entire time, and how are we going to be able to identify each other as we come together in our smaller communities, and because we will need each other more so, and we do need each other more so now than ever. And so I just want to thank you, Donald, for your contribution to this space. And I think that everybody should go out and read your book. And I'm going to sign up for my free gift, if you don't mind. And I hope everybody does as well. I'm just cognizant of time here, and so I don't want to keep people too much longer. I do want to give you, though, some last words. What would you like to leave our audience with here tonight, and how would you like people to get in touch with you and support you?
Oh, yeah, through my website. There's a contact form also on my website. To go to the page that says contact if you want to connect with me. And just in closing, then, why don't I follow up on something you just said, Katherine, and that we are going through a dark time. We have entered into the most difficult time of anybody's life that's living now. And we don't know how long it's going to last, but it will be at least a decade. I'm calling it. We're going to be counting this in terms of decades, not years, not months. And things are going to get worse. But there's always a silver lining, and we can understand this also in a spiritual sense, right? As we go through, we have many sayings from the Bible that tell us, right? The gold is tested in fire, and it tested here, it's purified, right? We're purified by struggles, and we get to sort out, right, the gold and the dross, right, and get rid of the dross and leave only the gold. This is what this time of testing, this time of struggles, is all meant for all of us to become a better spiritual beings out of this, because we are fundamentally spiritual beings, right? And we also can see this on not only on an individual level, but on a societal level, or on the level of humanity. And people who are familiar with the Bible will remember that every time in the Old Testament that the people of Israel turned away from God, disaster followed. And as a collective, humanity has definitely turned away from God. And we have these ungodly rulers that are doing ungodly things to all of us. And so it's a time not only of individual transformation, but of a collective transformation of all humanity. And I think that we are experiencing a time, as much as I'm a student and a lover of history, I think that we're experiencing a time that has never before happened in recorded history, and that the world that comes out of this is going to be significantly different than the world that has been before, and the people who
And I
come
think
out.
it's going to be better, and I think it's going to be immeasurably better, and
Yeah.
so, well, thank you very much, Donald. People are asking where this is broadcasting on Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and X Live. I will also be downloading this and putting it onto my website, katherinekowalchuk.com, as well. You can find it on YouTube and Rumble at Responsibility Quotient. And so thanks so much, Donald, for your contribution. As I said, let's stay in touch. I'm interested in reading your book, and I'm interested in reading your future books that you're going to write. So please let me know when and if that occurs. And for everybody out there, don't lose hope. And I think we do have people who are very wise that we can turn to, mostly God, and definitely turn to the Bible for guidance and instruction. And then second, the way forward and what the hell's going on. Because it's important that we go back to kind of like first principles in all of this, and recognize that of course free will, but recognizing this for what it is. It's a spiritual war. Left and right it's just a psyop. It's just a way to confuse people and pigeonhole people. But really, if we can look at it now from a good versus evil perspective, I think we're going to be a long way forward.
Yeah. Right on.
Okay, well, good night, everyone. We'll keep in touch, and take care, everyone.